Everybody, oh, the mic was muted, but now it's not. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another IGEAS panel. I am back, Nick D'Orazio, Director of Corporate Strategy at Invent Global, and we have a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. We're going to talk about scholastic esports, collegiate esports, academic esports, whatever you want to call it. But we're going to talk about the heart and soul of these revenue models that a lot of different organizations seem to have different opinions about. How really can we make these esports programs equitable? How can we truly make esports something that all students can access, that all school districts can access? These are, I think, the high-level goals that everyone talks about. But if you look deep in the actual structures of some of these leagues, they don't really help that. So we're going to kind of just bounce around some thoughts and opinions on how we think the industry should move forward, maybe some of the problems. And I see that we have a full chat here. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. By all means, ask questions. So I'm going to be looking at you guys' questions, and we're going to have time for Q&A. But anyways, without further ado, why don't I have our panelists introduce themselves? Why don't you tell us a little bit about where you're going in esports, what you're doing, and why don't we start with you, Kira?
Hi, my name is Kira Wills-Umdenstock, and I'm the CEO of the EGD Collective, which is a nonprofit that focuses on public higher education and esports and gaming. So what I usually work with is students in public universities that are wanting to get into games, or they're more on the casual scene, and really helping bring these programs to public colleges and universities to help with diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is why we're all here today. Prior to that, I've done a lot of work within nonprofits and education, and I moved into gaming once I got into college, and I founded Hunter College's gaming organization.
Nice. All right, and why don't you start us off? All right, Milo, please introduce yourself. How you doing, and what is your work within esports?
Hi, my name is Milo Campo. I am in Las Vegas. I built out the entire collegiate infrastructure and high school infrastructure here in Vegas, and currently I am the CEO of the official Vegas esports team.
Nice, the Vegas esports team. What is the branding behind that, if you don't mind me asking? Because there's so many different
8-bit
ways you can do
esports.
that.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
nice.
just 8-bit esports.
Oh, nice. All right, and James, last but certainly not least, thank you for joining us.
Sure. My name is James O'Hagan. I'm the Director of Digital and Virtual Learning for the Racine Unified School District in Racine, Wisconsin. I'm also the CEO and founder of the Academy of Esports, which is a consulting and podcast firm, I guess you could say, is what I do. I oversee currently the esports program in Racine, Wisconsin, which we have 5 different teams in our high school district. I'm also a member of the Wisconsin High School Esports Association and member of the board currently. I also am working on my doctoral dissertation in the field of instructional technology and design at Northern Illinois University. And I am a recovering rugby player, but still play. Yeah.
What is the hardest you've ever been hit?
No. Me, I've never been hit hard. It's everybody else.
Oh, nice.
Just kidding.
I love it. All right, so guys, why don't we start off just for anyone who may be confused, what do we mean by making a scholastic esports more equitable, right? Let's get our definition straight. James, what do you think the core of that sentence is about?
About how to make it more equitable?
Yeah.
The invitation. I mean, and that invitation can take so many different forms. For example, in education, we talk about the invitation to learning, right? Mm-hmm. And that invitation to learning can be impacted in a variety of different ways. So the invitation to learning can be impacted by where the child lives. Do they have to walk a long way to get to the school bus? Do they have to walk in the cold? Do they have a proper coat? Did they get breakfast that morning? What's it like when they get to school? Are they able to walk in the door without being harassed? Are they able to go to class and not be harassed in the hallways? When they get into class, does the teacher treat them with respect? Are they invited to be part of the discussion, or are they made to be felt stupid? There's a lot of factors in education that I see coincide with, how are we going to make, whether it's scholastic esports at the high school level or the collegiate level, more equitable. And a lot of it has to do with what is that invitation and what are the current barriers that some kids are finding in there, and how do we take down those barriers to make sure that the invitation is open to everyone.
So barriers, I'm definitely familiar with that, right? Anytime you're trying to produce any event or bring any people together, there's barriers. Milo, what are some of the most common barriers you've experienced or you've encountered when, creating this whole collegiate esports ecosystem in Vegas?
Honestly, from every level, the easy answer is funding.
Yeah.
But most importantly, it's infrastructure. So my definition of equity in scholastic and collegiate esports is technology and the access to the technology. Because while I was building out the high school esports like leagues here, I asked all the students and the student leaders, what is your biggest problem like competing in esports? And they said, a lot of us don't have computers, and the computers that we have here on campus can't handle the internet. If we boot up, with more than 3 games of Fortnite, the entire school crashes. So I'm like, okay, that's a big issue.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. I think that's fair to say. If you don't have a computer, then entering the esports scene is pretty hard. Akira, I would like to kind of second that question, right? Like, what are some of the most pressing equity-based problems around esports that you've encountered?
So just to build off what Milo said about technology, there's definitely that piece. Technology is expensive. So is education, and so is networking in the games industry. Like conferences like these cost money too. And especially with the students I work with, in the university system I mainly deal with, we have 61% of our students are either housing insecure, homeless, or food insecure. A lot of them are paying their parents' rent. They're working part-time jobs. Some of them are parents themselves. And so there's a lot of barriers that are a little more traditional and systematic that we tend to forget about because, we are very focusing on technology. But it goes off of what James was saying earlier for the first question. All of those kind of things that are a little bit invisible sometimes, like does the students have enough to eat? Are they supported at home? How much more effort do they have to put in as compared to more privileged students in order to have the same opportunities? And so when we talk about equitable esports, we really need to think about the entire student and what all of their barriers are, whether they're academic, emotional, or financial.
And none of that, I think it's what, to Kira's point, is not going to be turnkey. So what works in her community isn't necessarily something that's going to work in my community either. I think that's one of the biggest and hardest things to deal with here is that when we're talking about equity, it is so specific to the geography of where you live in a lot of cases. So for example, while we talk about, some big general, themes like access to, let's say, internet, what that means where Kira lives is going to be different than what that means where I live or where Milo lives, especially when you talk about when I get out into some of the rural areas around the city that I live, where they don't have wired internet service. And the only thing that they do have is satellite service. That means that their abilities to play are greatly diminished just because of where they live. So it is looking at this in a much bigger thing. There's no silver bullet to any of this.
Yeah. And, I think one of the first things that came to my mind is that obviously the industry stands to benefit if more students are playing esports, right? Like on paper, it seems as if, this is just logic, right? But we don't see many esports orgs or universities, I think, really take the issue seriously, or maybe put the amount of energy and resources into trying to access those underprivileged gamers or those new consumers. So I'm curious, and this is an open question to all of you because I'm sure you may have different experiences on it. Why do you think, or what do you think are some of the obstacles that are stopping the esports industry, or even those who have already cemented themselves within the collegiate space, but between really making this one of their driving missions?
Well, I can't speak directly to the collegiate space, but what I can say is that we at the high school level have not done a good job of diversifying our opportunity for kids to play. And by and large, we haven't. I think we were talking before the panel started, somebody talked about, the marketing. And it means so much more to just get the word out that you're going to have an esports program, but then figure out later what that's going to look like. In our program, our goal right out the gate, and where I think a lot of programs are missing out the gate, is that they don't have a goal around what they want their teams to look like. They'll hem and haw over the technology that they're going to buy, the computers they're going to play, the chairs they're going to buy, the jerseys they're going to buy,
you
the
gotta have the
space.
chairs, right?
But nobody ever sits down and says, for example, like we have in Racine Unified, has said, we want our teams to be a cross section of our student population. And while we're not always going to meet that goal, that is a vision for where we want our program to be. And we're going to do everything we can to strive towards that vision. Yeah. I realize, though, that, when we get to the collegiate space, again, there's a lot of this around making a big mark and attracting new students to the school, because it is a student driver. And they're doing it on shoestring budgets or no budget at all. Yeah. There's been very few resources that have been put into this. We in the Racine Unified School District, I have 12 general managers. I'm paying them $5,000 a year to be general managers on top of their teaching jobs. That's 12 people that I've got who are working, and we can focus in on making sure that we are getting all the students that we possibly can, because our student population is reflected by and large in a lot of ways in the general managers that we have. It's not just one person, where I know a lot of collegiate programs are trying to give one person 50 million hats to wear to try to do all things. And I know there's only so much you can do in one day. So where do you put your time?
And I've seen a lot of that kind of one person, a 50 million hat scenario. I think we saw a lot of that in like 2016, 2017, because the people who were getting into these universities and even high schools, they were people who came from the esports industry, and it was like they had all the answers. They had, tons of experience. They knew what to do. But I do think you have a very strong point there, in that it's not scalable. And not only is it's not scalable, you need a team that is wide enough to be able to actually, I believe that phrase you use, a cross-section of the school's population should be engaged with, or at least invited to enter esports. And that's very hard when you only have one person, or you only have, a whole esports thing led by maybe like 2 or 3 people, because they have a blind spots, they have their limitations, they have, their own experience. And you see a lot of that. I have a question for Milo, but I want to kind of set it up, like a bit. We've seen in sports, there is both the double-edged sword of, if I really want to play football, I need a football field, and I need a helmet, I need so and so, right? Like, we've seen that argument to why it's so hard to get into sports for underprivileged kids and just people who don't have the resources. And esports has often been touted as the solution to that. Oh, you just need a game. If you just have the same copy of the game, you're playing with the same things that the pros are playing. And yet you made some very good points about what about if you just don't own, a computer? There's actually these barriers that people aren't even thinking of, because esports has traditionally been, I would say, a middle class thing, right? Like we've seen esports people never even question the fact of owning a PC or having an internet connection. So, with all that said, where do you think are some of the practical first steps that people who are trying to pretty much walk the same steps you have, but maybe not in Vegas, somewhere else, right? What do you think are some of the first practical steps that people need to be asking themselves and then executing on when they're trying to start right, when they're trying to start a program the right way with equity in mind from the get-go? Where does someone start on that journey?
Education. The best solution that I've found so far that's applicable in most areas in esports is helping those that don't understand what esports is understand what esports is, so that you can get more resources, or you can get more people to attend your events. The biggest barrier that I had building out the high schools was talking to their parents, because they didn't want their kids playing video games. They didn't see it as an outlet just like sports is. Or if anything, they would compare it to sports by saying a football. I could also be very wrong in this appraisal, A football is, I'm going to assume, anywhere between $10 to $20, whereas a gaming mouse is somewhere upwards of $40 to $70, and the computer in itself that can handle it is $500 to $1,500. So that
But
justification,
Milo, don't
yeah,
forget, but not to interrupt, but the football uniform, the helmet, everything, you're
that
talking
too,
at least
yeah,
$1,000 to $1,500 for a football
yeah,
uniform.
yeah.
So,
But I'm talking from the stance of just practicing at home.
oh, gotcha.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not like formalized programs yet. So to me, to start a program, it's really understand the community, understand your target audience, identify the people willing to help push the mission, help find people to help you explain it to parents all day, every day, because I ended up getting a bunch of high school interns, and now they have this thriving Discord community that's more active than my collegiate Discord community, which is completely fine. And I'm so happy. So yeah, it starts with understanding, and yeah, it's not a turnkey solution. So every school has their own problems, every person has their own obstacles. So the more people you get going for the same goal, you can attack it from every angle.
Yeah, it seems to be a reoccurring theme that each school does have its own problems. Like each community does need to be handled differently, and I think it strikes as contradictory to most of the ways in which esports industry people and I would just say this, most of the time with the best of intentions, right? Like pretty much everyone working in collegiate esports, to my understanding and belief, like they really care about this. But yeah, they're not coming at this from an angle of you need to understand your community, focus on education, and learn what they need. They're actually selling a one-size-fits-all approach. That's their whole pitch. Their whole pitch is I have a store-bought, here's a package, I'm going to sell you this package, and trust me, it works. And I don't think, from some of the insights we're hearing, that seems to be a problematic way to push esports. Akira, I want to get a little more positive, right? Like, yes, we're talking about, esports equity is hard and there's struggles, but what's the upside, right? What are some of the positive things that if an esports program does take the time, spend the energy, what are some of you think the positive returns and maybe some of the success stories that they can expect from that?
So, as we were saying earlier about how it should be very
Akira, can you just reset your camera? It looks as if you're frozen a bit. At first I thought you were just extremely patient, and I was like, wow, she's just extremely poised for this answer. But yeah.
Okay, is it am I good now?
Actually, it's not, but don't worry. Your voice is fine, so you can still answer the question.
Okay. What we were saying before with how it should be pretty obvious the benefits of having a diverse esports population and why aren't people picking this up? The benefits are, we have diverse players. Those diverse players turn into diverse industry professionals, and then they help with innovation in our industry, whether that is, on the business side, whether it's games as an art form, because Roger Ebert, I disagree with him completely. Games are an art form. And if we want our society to take what we do seriously, we need to get them more on board. And in order to do that, we need innovation. We need a diverse perspective of voices helping us out with that. We can't just leave them at the door and have games be just for one set of person.
Yeah. I think too, the video game industry as a whole, I think they've woken up to the reality of a whole new type of video game consumer. I think obviously a lot quicker than esports. That makes sense because esports is more niche, and everyone plays video games. But there's actually a company called Geekleets. They do esports stuff over in Arlington, Texas. And I was once speaking on a panel with their founder, Danny Martin. A shout out to Danny. And he had a very interesting take that I would like to kind of just throw you guys and hear, and hear what you have to think about it. He said one of the most important things. Oh, hi, Kira, you're back. Great. So he said one of the most important things when trying to start a community where there is none, right? So like there is no esports community where he's from in Arlington, Texas, and it's and predominantly black neighborhoods, black schools, and it's just not something, right? He says one of the first things you need to do is just you need to be there. You need to show up. You need to just be a place. You need to create a place where people can show up. It doesn't matter if they do. You just need to invite. And that kind of goes to one of the things that James said early on when we were even trying to first define equity. It is the invitation. So I'm curious, do you guys think the invitation towards a more equitable esports, does that start with the places we gather? Does that really start as that, well, maybe you should section off a place in your school that is just for esports? Maybe is that really the best place to start in a physical location?
Well, again, to me, it's not one spot, and it's not one thing that's creating these inequities that we see in esports. First off, I think Any did a really good job of creating a report on diversity and inclusion in esports that did have 12 recommendations that every program should consider. Number one being perform a diversity audit and create a plan for inclusion. Again, a lot of people just haven't thought about this.
Yeah.
But again, there's other barriers to esports. Again, when I talked about the invitation to learning. So what's the invitation to esports? The invitation to esports to be inclusive is not $64 per season. The inclusion is not just AAA titles.
Yeah.
The inclusion is not in a thing where you just say, hey, we have an esports team and that's it. Okay. We in our school district, we make a concerted effort to recruit. We're making sure that our next iteration of our esports is not going to be around just AAA titles. It's going to include independent developers. It's going to include independent, and the developers, come on. We can't have, I'll call it out, Riot. I'm sorry, your community standards are narrowing the opportunity for people to play. You're not going to grow your base by narrowing the base of people and access to your games.
Yep.
There is no pipeline for me as either a school leader or as a leader of a state association to get access according to their standards. There's no pipeline. My virtual learning program, though, I can go to the NCAA and say, NCAA, how do I make my program be NCAA compliant? They have a pipeline, they have a process. I can do it. I can't do it with Riot. I can't do it with Blizzard.
Yeah, and I can't explain that, but if I had to try, I'd probably say that I just don't think the video game industry is thinking currently as esports as anything more than a marketing tool. Esports to the game industry is very much a thin layer of a marketing budget, and there's actually been some really good writing on that. I love the Overwatch League. I rep it all the time, but even I see the criticisms are very, very fair, right? The Overwatch League and some of these huge leagues that have come before it, they're not necessarily worrying about how many people from all over the world, from all different angles, are able to play this game in the competitive glory that we're trying to push. And instead, it seems as if they're offering this competitive glory and this competitive, a storyline to a very narrow group of people. That either have the opportunity, have the existing connections, have had the existing success in other games. And it always begs this question, is esports talent so rare that all of most of the Overwatch League players came from past successful FPS games? I don't think so. I can't help but think that the talent pool in esports is so much larger than we actually make use of. There are so many people with undeniable hunger. You see this a lot in the fighting game community. And just a quick poll: who here considers themselves of the fighting game community? Has anyone dived much into that arena with fighting games? Yeah. So Milo, you could back me up on this then. Pretty much when you go to a fighting game tournament, you never know who you're going to meet. It is an extremely diverse group of people. You pretty much can never count anyone out. I've seen 13-year-olds take matches off of sponsored pros. And it seems as if maybe the fighting game community, maybe because of its arcade roots or its more grassroots, there is so much diversity in their player base. Do you think that is possible with these AAA games? Like, do you think that it's possible to pull, the same amount of diversity we see there, or are some of those equitable barriers just too high for players to beat on their own?
Once upon a time, yes. When IVLOL first started, which is now University League of Legends or whatever it's called now, when it first started in 2012, Riot gave us a ton of support. They gave us a ton of resources. They gave us mentorship. They gave us exclusivity.
Yep.
They gave us the exclusive offering that attracted people to come, which is why 8-Bit grew so large. So the reason why fighting games is so big and so diverse, because 7-year-olds have taken games off me, and I'm not embarrassed to say that.
Everybody takes games off of me.
Yeah.
I'm trash.
The fighting games community stayed grassroots, and the publishers stayed out.
Yep.
Now, again, that's a double-edged sword, because we don't get these, like, the international level, prize pools of $30 million or so, but we get a community. And another thing about the fighting game community too that's very unique is that net play sucks. In order for you to get the most out of fighting games, you have to be in person, and that requires interaction. That requires camaraderie and community. So I say this a lot, especially because Vegas is the home of Evo. The fighting games community has been doing it right for the last 20 to 30 years, and they're still doing it right. These AAA games, until they come back to the community, which I understand, on the business side, there's no ROI in these community programs. They're thinking about longevity, or they're thinking of longevity and retention. They're not thinking about recruiting or onboarding. I get it, but there's a tipping point, and we can't swing so far this way without going back, or else we all lose.
Yeah, and actually,
but wait a second. But hold on.
I think we're going to say the same thing, James.
Hold on. No. I'm going to take it a totally different way, because I think the conversation is getting kind of lost here. I really feel like, for example, between the three of us here who have programs or have started programs at work, how many of us designed our programs to only be about professional development for developing pro esports players? None of us, right? So then why the hell are we so hell-bent on developing these pro-type systems? We shouldn't be. To me, I think we've become so focused on what the pros do, but we're not looking at this from what the academic value is, what the societal value, the SEL value in all of this is. We need to put those things first, then before a professional slant on how we're implementing things at whether it's high school or collegiate.
Yeah. And Kira, and actually James, I'm glad you brought that up, because it kind of piggybacks off something that I wanted to address that Milo said. It is true that while there is less of ROI in the short term, I do think there is a very clear return on that investment of building these communities. But maybe esports, or maybe these game developers, maybe they view it as a risk or something like that. But Akira, I just wanted to talk a little bit more with you about those types of positive returns on investments that you can get from community, right? Like, I've seen it. I'm sure you've seen it too, right? Like, now that we've talked about the obvious problem, right? What are some ways in which we can give some practical advice to solve it, right? Like, what are some ways in which people can take away from this panel, feel inspired, and be like, yep, I'm going to now start my own first esports club, and I'm going to do it right. And yep, I believe James, I believe Milo, all this right. Where would you point someone who is trying to have that moment?
So when I first started, actually, I came from the game development side. I was not involved in esports at all. And due to a very large chain of events with administration, I ended up merging my organization with 5 other games-related organizations, and we became the everything related to a games club. And through that, I was thrust in charge of all these esports players. I had to learn what a wave dash was and what laning is and all this other, terminology. And something that worked from us at the very beginning, especially as a organization that was not supported by their school at all, had no funding, and was dealing with, a population of majority of underserved populations. We ended up targeting everyone that had any interest in games at all, or a games adjacent field. So we had web developers in the room, we had business students that were interested in doing startups, we had journalists, we were really going on all these different intersectional ways that people could get involved with games, and not just we're pro players, we're going to go compete and seal all, we're going to do great. And what happened was people would come in for one thing and they would come out doing everything. And when you pull in people that maybe are interested in just playing Candy Crush on their phone in the corner, but then they see people play League and they're like, oh, maybe I want to try it. And then they try it and then they like it. That's a much more accessible way to bring people into esports that maybe might be intimidated by, bro culture or anything else that we have made headlines for. And it also, really brings about the whole educational side and helping, convince administrations to get on board with this thing. Like, yes, it has academic value, it has, career value. And even for people that aren't pursuing esports careers, maybe they're pursuing other careers that esports relates to, it becomes a much, much wider thing that people are more open to being a part of. And so when we talk about diversity, yes, we're talking about diversity in, the types of players we're having, and diversity in identity and in economic, status, but we're also talking about diversity of the games that we talk about, diversity in the ways people interact with games. And by bringing them all together, you get a lot of people right off the bat, and you get a lot more. It's a much better marketing tool, in my opinion, to have a lot of people and a diverse amount of people interacting and being in your community than it is with, giant signs or using budget money to, advertise to corporate sponsors and things like that. Because yes, names bring them in, but that doesn't mean they stay.
Yeah, and actually, I can't agree more with that answer. Actually, kind of a combination of what James said and what Kira said is actually very close to why I can thank my success within the esports industry and gaming, right? Because while I was first in love with esports as a thing, I learned that, there's an entire game industry. There's an entire industry of people wanting to connect and people wanting to just compete. I actually really want to underscore this point we brought up, that not like there are more outcomes to esports than just being a pro player. And also too, like esports is very fun at the casual level, at the intermediate level, at the amateur level. There's tons of life skills that young kids can learn. I mean, shoot, at the very least, learning how to lose. That's something that I always accredit my early esports career with. I learned how to lose a lot, and I learned how to lose with a sense of positivity. And these are things that I would have never learned without esports, right? These are things that I would have never even realized helped me, I guess, get where I want to be. So first of all, really, really great answers. We have a lot of questions in chat. So in the next 15 minutes, I'm just going to go through some of these good questions. People have been thumbing them up. Let's do our most thumbed up question from Calum. He says, considering a world post-COVID-19, do you think investing in PC bongs, high-end computers available to use in social settings, blah, 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 at schools, would be a valuable investment for universities, high schools, etc., to encourage more scholastic esports in America/Europe? I mean, yeah, I think I can start with saying it seems as if your school doesn't have a PC and you invest in PCs, I think that would be good for esports, right? But there's probably a little more nuanced answer you can bring to that, James.
Well, with our program, we actually we have 5 different high schools, but we have one location that we all compete, play, and practice in. And that's actually a private-public partnership with a gaming lounge we have in downtown Racine called Not Your Parents' Basement. When COVID hit back in March, we literally lost almost an entire team from one high school because of lack of access and devices.
Yep.
the leveling of the playing field by having us all compete, play, practice in one single space has been, I think, part of our secret sauce on why we have been so successful. And I know that when we come out of this, our efforts are definitely on making sure that we firm up that access for all of our kids.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that this never has to happen again in this kind of way, where kids lose the ability to play.
Yeah.
And that isn't just by buying PCs. We are also closely partnered with our public library, and our public library in town has purchased gaming laptops that they check out to kids.
That's awesome.
which has helped tremendously as well. And now, because of changes with E-rate funding, our school district, where in the past, families who didn't have internet access just didn't have it, our school district now is actually paying for wired broadband access to be brought into the homes. It's cheaper for us to do that than to give them hotspots or anything else. So I feel that now, at least at the high school level, because we are going to have this expanded access, now we have expanded opportunity through esports or casual gaming clubs or casual tournaments. It doesn't all have to be esports. We can meet our kids where they're at.
Yeah, and actually, this kind of answers another question, so I'll just read it and then go on. Someone asked, should publishers and developers work directly with educational establishments in order to allow more people to have access to equipment? I mean, I think the answer is yes. That sounds like, like that would just be a net positive, especially based on how James broke it down that, if you give all your kids and all of these players an equal playing field, I actually do think that would improve a team's competitive merit, because, you have kids very hungry, looking for success, and they're going to take that opportunity.
But Milo raised a really good point. Why would the developers and why would these companies give us the equipment if there's no return on investment?
Well, so actually, let's talk about though, because return on investment, right? Obviously, you're not going to make any money giving kids, but don't you gain like brand loyalty? Don't you gain don't these kids and these students, aren't they, forever grateful in a weird consumeristic way? I mean, I'm trying to put on my thinking cap if I had to try to pitch this, right?
Yeah, so
I think that's something you actually see with TESPA, in the loyalty that you see from all the students that come out of that program from Blizzard.
Yeah.
That is definitely a thing that happens, and I think that's why they put so much into TESPA and collegiate.
Yeah.
Because a lot of those chapter leaders, they go straight into working for TESPA, or they go working into the Overwatch League. You can't go into Blizzard and not see a former TESPA chapter leader.
It's true. TESPA has made a surefire way to hire collegiate talent, right? If you give them the tools where they're young, they make all of those mistakes early on. I know plenty of all of the early events I did in high school. Disasters, but lots of pizza. That's good. We have one question here too from GN. In addition, actually, there's another question. Okay, so how do you support players in esports with disabilities and mental illness, especially in a post-COVID community? And then here's the in addition to that, are there any differences between the path to esports in a public and a private school? So we're playing now with two forms of ways in which kids and students can have different access. You have the public and private, and now disability and mental illness. So what do you think are some ways in which we can, as an industry, keep these groups in mind?
So something that I have very much stressed within my organization and the program is student services, human services, social services, and pointing students in the right direction to get those services, because a lot of these students don't know where to find them.
Yeah.
We'll often get students asking us, where to go to get therapy that they have insurance for, where they can find how to register for food stamps, how to get on unemployment, all this stuff that no one has ever taught them how to do. And so making sure that you support those students in that way by just pointing them in the right direction, because not everyone is a certified therapist or a financial aid advisor.
Yep.
But just having that in your arsenal to know where to point people is a very, very powerful thing.
Yeah.
And when it comes to public-private, that's something I'm very, very well versed in. A lot of public schools don't have the connections that private universities have when it comes to internships and jobs and things like that. The statistic for CUNY is 12% of students get a paid internship in their time in college. Like, it's very, very low.
Yeah.
And so being able to, something the industry can do is to help gain access to more of these networking events, helping subsidize tickets for students, or that colleges that have funding can subsidize tickets for students to be able to go to these things, is something that should be done. And then for students that are currently in this position that, are not sure where to look, there are a lot of programs that exist. And not everyone is very savvy in the Google search method when they're a student. But there are a lot of programs. GDC is a very famously expensive conference to go to, but they have a lot of community partners that give out all access tickets. And there are a lot of esports events that will give out free tickets if you just know where to look. And so what community leaders can do and what student leaders can do is start amassing and making a database of where these services are located, and then give that information to their students.
And
it's still the invitation.
Yeah.
It's still what Kira's talking about is still that invitation. It goes back to, with our program, our rules are set up where if you need assistive technology tools, I used to work in an all special ed school. Assistive technology, I could see how magical it is when you use the right tool with the kid who needs that tool.
Yep.
And I can see how assistive technology tools are going level the playing field with esports and allow these kids access. It redefines athletic culture. It diversifies opportunity for student participation. The other thing that's key too is it's not just about, because there was also the question about mental health. One of the ways you push against a mental health crisis, well, there's two good ways to push against a mental health crisis. Push against it. One is with a positive adult interaction, and the other one is through play. And what we do in our program is I do not want to kick any kids out. If you're not making grades, that doesn't mean you go home. That doesn't mean you're off the team. Because in our community in which we live, 60% of our adults have had at least one adverse childhood experience, which means they're probably passing it on to the kids. If by that logic, if we take a kid who is coming to esports practice every day, not missing it, and not making homework, I would rather have him or her there than at home or running the streets. Because again, there's a positive adult interaction there, and there's at least a pathway to get them re-engaged back into school. And again, honoring play. It doesn't mean that they have to start and play in the matches, but I also don't want to kick them to the curb either.
Yeah.
Those are important things as well.
James, I just wanted to comment on that. I think it's a good note to end because we are out of time, and this has just been a fantastic panel. Like, really, I feel like we could talk about this much longer. But the amount of schools that do have some sort of grade requirement to play on the team or so and so is very high. And yet I feel as if anyone in charge of these institutions would have heard just that simple reasoning and thought about the students' well-being instead of, can I produce an esports pro that will eventually be good marketing for my school? And, if we use esports as a tool to, help people and think about how can we increase engagement, how can we increase student success, how can we even increase, a student competence in a hobby that they love. I think that's a very, very good practical start towards maybe the people in the chat who are, thinking about starting their own thing. And speaking of which, right after this, I'm having a workshop panel, and I'm going to be teaching people how to get their first 101 esports club members. I've started many clubs, and I swear I have it down to a science. So you guys can tune into that later. But anyways, we are out of time. You guys can please, there's so many questions in chat. It's actually insane. You guys can reach out to any of these panelists via Swapcard. So you can, if you're on Swapcard watching now, all of these speakers, you just scroll down, connect with all of them, just click that little link, ask them your questions. That's why they're here. They have so much information. They want to help mentor you guys and help steer the esports industry in the right direction. So guys, I just want to say thank you so much for being here. It was super, super great. I hope we can have more of these type of conversations. And yeah, guys, this has been our panel. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
Yep, thanks.
All right, guys.
Thank you.
I will talk to you soon about esports clubs. Catch you later.